85% of candidates fail at interviews, and this is not because of a lack of skill, but more so a lack of preparation. Also, the brain goes into a threat mode. Welcome back to Her Career, Her Way, a podcast all about inspiring ambitious individuals by giving them the tools, strategies, and having honest conversations to help navigate your chaotic career in your 20s. And as a 20-something-year-old, I definitely empathize with that. So today's episode is going to talk all about interviews and how to prepare for an interview to succeed without freezing or faking it. And this is number 1 of the series. And I feel like this is really important, especially right now. I feel like a lot of people are doing interviews. A lot of people are preparing for them, looking at the next steps for their jobs, whatever it is. And honestly, all year round as well. I know that I'm kind of in this stage of trying to prepare for interviews and things like that. I really wanted to do a little bit of research into how to interview better. I've been getting some LinkedIn DMs asking me about the interview skills from my past internship, what they were asking, what they should prepare for, who they should reach out. And I love answering those questions as well because I ask them as well. So I think this is just such an important topic to elucidate on and see how we can develop as human beings. So I know that I've gone into interviews feeling super overprepared, but also very anxious because I didn't know what was going to be asked. And I also feel like I've gone into interviews being superly over-scripted. Honestly, even with these podcasts, sometimes I feel like I have to redo them if I feel that they're too overly scripted because it just feels disingenuous. It also feels very disconnected and it just doesn't feel like I'm showing up in the best way possible. And I feel like this is very common, where most people don't fail at interviews because they're unqualified, because a lot of people have qualifications such as their master's degree, bachelor's degree, whatever it is. And I definitely feel that some people have really, really good qualifications who haven't gotten the job, but I feel like they fail at the interview stage. And it's because the nervous system hijacks your intelligence. I mean, how many times have you gone into an interview and your brain just freezes up and fogs? Like you can't remember 2 words, you can't put together a coherent sentence. You're at a loss. And I think this is because of the nervous system not being regulated and also the brain going into that freeze, flight, fawn mode, whatever it is. So this episode promises to help understand what is happening in the brain during interviews and how to train your brain under pressure so that you can utilize the stress to do better and show up in the most authentic way possible. Also showing up in a regulated, clear, and adaptable way, because that's what interviews are. They're not about performance. They're about how you can show up, who you are, and how you can adapt to different circumstances. So part 1, why your brain sabotages interviews. I think interviews really trigger anxiety and stress, and I'm still understanding what the difference between stress and anxiety is. Definitely, if you know what it is, comment down below. I'd love to know more about it. But I think it's because of 1, the self-fulfilling prophecy. What you expect, the brain prepares for, because the brain cannot differentiate between imagination and reality. And what I mean by this is that there's a lot of sections of the brains, but I'm going to focus on the limbic system, which is the emotional state, common for stress, anxiousness, fear, happiness, whatever. And then also the prefrontal cortex, which is the self-control, the CEO, the one who makes the decisions. I know I talked about these parts of the brains before, but I just think it's so important to reiterate because I forget things all the time. And again, learning is really remembering not to forget. Check out that learning episode if you haven't already. And basically what happens is if you anticipate failure, if you are constantly thinking like, oh, I'm not going to do well in this interview, or this person isn't going to like me, or something bad is going to happen, and you are setting yourself up for things that are going wrong, then what happens is that your limbic system takes all of that in and it perceives it as a threat and shuts down that reasoning. It takes over with all of that. It takes over and overcompensates, and the prefrontal cortex isn't able to switch on basically. And what's happening is called neuroplasticity callback. And this is when what you mentally rehearse gets reinforced. So if you're reinforcing all of these negative situations, circumstances, anticipations, whatever it is, then you're wiring your brain to reinforce those negative emotions and feelings. So then during the interview, you're already at a heightened state of anxiousness, and that causes your prefrontal cortex, the one for making decisions and logic and everything like that, gets minimized. And so you're not able to think rationally, which is why you can't think of those answers on the spot. So I think it's really important to understand how important your thoughts are, because that's also where your attention goes towards. So basically, anticipating rejection, you're hyper monitoring yourself. And if you're overthinking your answers, you're also losing presence. You're reducing the ability to use your prefrontal cortex for that logical reasoning and rationale or answers or whatever you want. So basically, it's so important to regulate your nervous system and really pay attention to what thoughts you're putting out there. Also, I wanted to talk about why perfect answers really make it worse for you. Why that over preparation and needing to have the perfect thing to say might actually be hindering your success during interviews. Matcha break. Over preparation and needing to have the perfect thing to say might actually be hindering your success during interviews. I really think that memorization is kind of a perfection trap. It reduces your flexibility, and I ultimately think it also leads to brain freeze or brain fog because you have this perfect answer in your mind. But what happens if that question isn't asked exactly how you prepared for? What if you have a question that you curated that was, how are you adaptable? But the question that the interviewer asks is, how have you dealt with a challenge? And in your mind, you're thinking adaptability, adaptability. But then when you get that question, you are just so unsure of what it was because you can't adapt to that question because you have this pre-curated perfect answer for the question about adaptability, not, or whatever I just said. I can't remember. But I think when you have such a solidified answer to a certain question, that can actually hinder you. Because interviews, as I said, are conversations and they're not performances and they're not supposed to be this perfectly curated conversation that you already knew about. You haven't even had this interview yet, hence why you don't know the answers or the questions 100% of the time. I also feel like interviews are conversations under mild stress. And so when the brain is under stress, normally recall drops because of that limbic system again taking over. However, there is an amount of good stress that can enhance performance. And this is called eustress, which is the good stress. And it makes you more alert. It makes your senses heightened. It has higher energy. And so the important part is to utilize this positive stress. Understand how to gauge whether it's positive or negative. And it's when it's in that mild stress state, when you're not totally anxious and you're thinking, oh my gosh, everything's going wrong. But why not think, what can go right? And use that energy to power you through the conversation. I'm going to talk about this later in the frameworks, but having a little bit of flexibility in your answers and in your stories and going off script can really help with making your answers in your interview more compelling and also more about you and who you are as a person. So more aligned and intentional. And part 2 is going to get into how interviewers actually remember you. So there's this peak end rule, which I found in a journal article, and they were talking about that people remember intensity and the ending. And when you show up curious, clear, and confident, they also remember that more. And so while first impressions matter, absolutely, endings reshape memory. So really having a lasting impression is just as important and maybe even more so. So if you don't get it right, if you feel like you've started off on the wrong footing or whatever it is, that's okay. You can overcompensate by having a really strong narrative and having a really strong lasting impression. And so you can do this by your presence, your warmth, your clarity. And this is all to say it's so much more important than that perfect start. Also, Rachel Montanez, which is a burnout and career coach, she talks about that human behavior is really important, that people like people who feel familiar, who show them that they've been there before, some kind of connection on that level. And that's so important in an interview, is to connect. And I'm talking more about when you have face to face interviews. With higher views, I still think having that level of connection, think of it as if you're talking to somebody. Use that eye contact, have that really, really clear communication. Because yes, maybe AI is vetting it and seeing all those things. But in my experience, sometimes more than not, the company is also watching those interviews after that vetting process. So it's like you are talking to someone. And if you have that eye contact and you have that presence and warmth and the body language that symbolizes that you're present, that you're aware, and you are professional, whatever the culture is, obviously, then I think that really shines through in your interview and differentiates you from other candidates. Also, having that subtle mirroring in an in person interview is really important because it helps to build that safety, and the limbic system is actually scanning for the safety. So when somebody, for example, is doing this or is pointing the, 1, 2, 3, and then you should mimic that, replicate it. Obviously, don't do it all the time. You're not a copycat, but that just mirrors a sense of safety. And I do feel like hand gestures can really add and elevate to that personal narrative, making it more intense, as you could say, and communicative. Also, have empathy, have that emotional intelligence. And that is definitely a skill that I'm going to be talking about in these upskilling series. And empathy is so important because it signals competence. It highlights that you are able to be aware of other people's emotions, the context, the situation, and not just focus on yourself. And that's so important, especially in companies and businesses where it's all about normally serving other people. So you definitely don't have to be flawless. You just need to be memorable for the right reasons. And part 3 is the focus, the skill that nobody talks about. So the working memory is limited to around 7 bits of information, and this was seen by Bond Williams, which is a recruitment agency. So when you have all that self-judgment, it actually steals away from that bandwidth of that working memory. So when you focus externally, when you are focusing on everything that can go wrong, it's stealing energy from the ability to think clearly. But when you're able to extract and look at it from an observer point of view and not really think about, oh my gosh, am I talking too fast? Am I talking too slow? What are they thinking about me? Whatever it is, you are able to think about the situation and show up more present to the interview and the conversation, which leads to better rational thinking because you're able to use your prefrontal cortex better. A simple contrast is, how am I doing? Fragmented thoughts. Towards listening, what are they asking for? Structuring, breaking down those complex problems logically, analyzing, under pressure thinking. How can you answer things quickly and being adaptive to whatever questions they're asking? And then recommending, how can you synthesize these insights into action? So basically, these are all grounded answers that aren't thinking about the internal self-doubt. And it allows your working memory to focus on these things instead of the negative thoughts that are going into your mind about yourself. So attention really shapes performance. And it's really important to have intentional thoughts throughout this and really be present in the moment because confidence follows focus. And now for part 4 is the tactical prep that actually works. How can you prepare for an interview that sets you up for success? I think, and this is what I've done in a lot of my interviews, and I just want to preface with all of these interview tips and things like that. This is mainly for that qualitative work, not so much of the quantitative. I know there's interviews with a lot of case studies and things that you have to do like that, and that is all so important. I'm not discounting that at all, but I'm talking more about the human interaction connection, more of the behavioral interviews. With this behavioral interview prep, I think the main thing is preparation grounded in research. I think one of the most things that people don't do is understand the culture, understand their values, their mission, and also what is the role that you're applying for. These are all such basic things, but it's so jarring to me how many people underestimate these. It is so important to understand who you are having the conversation with. And I even do this on coffee chats, just researching who the person is, what their job is, what the company is, so that you can ask more questions. And also, it gives them an understanding that you have done the work to show up and understand who they are. Because how would it feel if you went into somewhere that you were interviewing and you didn't know anything about the business? What would that look like to the interviewer? You really have to put yourself in their shoes and see like what would they even want in a candidate? How are they going to add value into my company? And so when you put that perspective on, you just realize how important it is to research their values and their culture. They're assessing fit just as much as they're assessing your qualifications and your ability. So really research the values and culture. And this is on their company website. So whenever I go into an interview, I look up what do they value, what's their mission statement, and what's their culture like. It also gives you a sense of, does this company align with what I want? If it's a very hierarchical company and you are better in a flat hierarchy, maybe it's not the right company for you. Maybe that's not how you're going to best show up. So honestly, you're doing yourself a favor as well by researching what the company is. For the role, if they have opportunities to do a job simulation like Forage, I think it's really, really important to do those because not only does it show to the company that you're willing to do the preparation work, that you are being proactive and that you are committing the time to do this, but it also gives you a little bit of an idea of what this role would be like. How would you feel working at this company? Also, I feel like we mostly learn through action and experience. So having that experience teaches you so much more. And talk to current or past employees. Use your network. See on LinkedIn who the hiring or recruiting agent is, or reach out to people that have been past employees and maybe they have insight onto the company and maybe you can do a coffee chat with them. You never know. Maybe someone in your alumni has previous work with them. Whatever it is, just coffee chat someone, get to know them. And if you don't want to do that, just look them up on LinkedIn and see what they say about the job itself. Or I really think what's important is to go online and search up interview questions for the job. More than not, Glassdoor has them. Sometimes Quizlet has them. You never know. And just that can really prep you for the interview as well. So this is the main bulk of the preparation work is research. Research, research, research. I cannot stress that enough. I think it's probably like 60% of the work. And then second part is the story bank. And these are not answers, but these are just 3 to 4 flexible stories that you can have up your sleeve to talk about. And each story can align with whatever the company's values are. If they value adaptability, make sure to have a story about that. If they value a fast-paced environment, make sure to have a story about that as well. See how your resume or your CV can align with their company values and use frameworks. I love the STAR method. I actually think it's probably a really good way to structure it because it tells the situation, it tells the task that you had, the action, and the result. And then what I like to add is the stars, which is an S at the end, is a signal. How does this relate to the company? How is this story that you have that you just told? How is it relevant to this company and how can it add value? Because at the end of the day, what you're interviewing is how you as a person can present value for this company, how you can add to it, how you can grow the company, how you can be somebody that optimizes it. It's a business. And so you really have to make sure that you're signaling the right stories. And that's why you have these flexible stories because yes, you can research online and see what the possible questions are, but honestly, they can change and you never really know what you're going to be thrown. So when you have these flexible stories, you're able to adapt really easily to whatever the question that you're asking. And I think some of the main ones are definitely having strengths and weaknesses, showing how you can deal with conflict or challenges or something unexpected happens. I also think a lot of questions orient of why you and really having that strong elevator pitch, I think is another important thing to do. And make sure you tailor it towards the company because you can have a generic answer, but that isn't going to show that you fit into the company. So I think that's really important. And humans remember stories. We're actually wired for them. More than not, 40% of our brains are visual and narrative processing. So that's why stories are so important. Also, read your CV, read your resume. That's really important. Like, make sure you know every single bullet point on that because they might ask you to run through it. And if you don't know it, that's a signal that maybe you haven't put as much effort in as you could have. Number three is having an implementation intention plan. So having that if and then plan framework. So instead of just relying on all your willpower, which can definitely decrease, especially if you're in a heightened state, remember the brain recall system reduces. So having this can help with you not going into that brain fog or brain freeze. So if I blank, I will then pause and ask for clarification. I also think, especially in higher views and things like that, repeating the question that you're asked is really helpful because not only does it prep you to speak on the issue, but it also, I think, signals and signposts to the interviewee what you're going to talk about. And yes, they have the question, but it's nice to know that you have understood it and that you have really listened and taken in what it is. You can even paraphrase it. I also think this is good in communications in general, is just if somebody says something, it's like you're piggybacking off of it. Now you don't have to use, I'm going to piggyback off of what you said. You can just paraphrase what they just said. As you talked about how the importance of listening, I also think that blah, 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 blah. Give your own experience, something like that, just because it shows them that you have listened and heard them and that you're not just wanting to speak, but it shows that you have taken the time to understand it and then come up with a thoughtful answer. Another example is if I feel nerves, I'm going to ground my posture and take a breath. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to honestly have that silence. More than not, there is power in silence and there's power in not always talking all the time. You don't have to fill every single space. That's not how conversations work normally. It's natural to have a little bit of a break. And I think it also gives the interviewer a little bit of time to just kind of understand what you've just been talking about. Also, with this if then plan, it helps reduce that cognitive load on you. It helps the executive system and it also frees the working memory, which is limited, as I was talking about. Because if you have this plan, then if something arises, you know how to deal with it. You've proactively taken the steps to deal with whatever happens. It maintains that adaptability. And visualization is really a mental rehearsal. And I read about this from Nina Miranda, the chief bar raise at the bar. And she talks about the three important steps, which is intentional thoughts, which activates the neural system, and repetition, so that focus, which creates those new pathways, and then action, which is when confidence follows. So if you think that the interview is going to go well, then the activation happens in your neurons. And then if you keep on repeating that, it sets up those new pathways so that then the synapses can fire faster. And then confidence follows when that action happens, when you act on it, when you are creating that if then plan, if you are having those 3 to 4 flexible stories, if you are really researching the cultural fit for the company, then your confidence follows. Feel like you can do this interview. And having that positive reframe helps feed that good stress, that eustress, and it helps you engage your prefrontal cortex more instead of letting that limbic system take over. I also feel like, especially in higher views and even in just general interviews as well, like online interviews, whatever it is, that it's really important that you practice these stories. Because yes, you can think of them, but if you don't practice them, I don't honestly think they're going to feel good when you're saying them. Also, you might be relying on your notes more instead of genuinely being present in the conversation. I had a friend that had like this list of stories that she went through and she asked me to go through the questions and then she would answer it. And I think that just simulates the conversation itself so that when you show up in that conversation, you feel more grounded because you've already done it. You've already practiced it. You already know what you're going to say. Obviously, not just to a T, like you have that flexibility in you. And I think it's really important to have bullet points instead of just written sentences because that never feels candid to me. I think having bullet points just so then you can glance at it and then fill up whatever things you have. Also, if you're someone like me, I think looking up synonyms is really helpful because More than not, I show up into interviews and it's like I can't think of another word to say other than imperative or whatever like that. And I think switching up that language helps a little bit just so that it's not as repetitive. And it also shows that you can use more than one word, which might be a plus. But yeah, just having those quick things that you can glance at and know yourself. Know what your tendencies are. And the more interviews that you do, the more successful you'll get because you'll understand and you'll feel what it's like. You'll feel where you might go wrong. You will feel something that clicks in you. When you do these interviews, you get to know yourself. And so I think it's just show up to interviews, do your best, and take on some of these tips. I hope that they're helpful. I hope this framework is helpful. And just to kind of summarize it really quickly, it's to research. Research is the most important thing. If you've taken anything away from this, research. Research the company, the culture, the values, and the role. And then 2 is have those 3 to 4 flexible stories. Use the STARS method. Use that situation, task, action, result, and signal. And then 3 is have that implementation intention plan, that if then, so that you feel prepared for it. And practice. That's the little side tip, is really practice. And know that if an interview goes wrong, it's okay because that's a learning that you can utilize in your next interview. And interviews really aren't about proving your worth, they're about exploring alignment for you and the company. Reframe judgment of yourself into fit. Do you fit with this company? Also, understanding that learning and practicing and experiencing these interviews teaches you how to show up under pressure. And that's so important. And uncertainty, because you never know. And that's life in general. And this will happen at every stage of your career, so I've been told. And the goal in these interviews isn't to conform yourself to whoever this company is, but it's about being more intentional, adaptable, and self-trusting during this. And I also feel like it can aid confidence as well. So I hope this was really impactful for you and that you maybe feel like you have a little bit more skills under your belt to have a successful interview and know that you are interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. And I know I've said that before, but I really do think it's true. And I wanted to end on that note. But thank you so much for listening. Definitely comment below, subscribe so that I can make more content and make episodes that are resonating with you. I'd love to hear about it. I read each and every one of these comments. And in the next upskilling series, I'm going to talk about experience and how you can use whatever relevant experiences you have into whatever job or role or interview that you might do. So thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope you kill it in your next interview, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. One more thing that I think is important is how you present yourself. So make sure that you're dressing the part as well. It's definitely not the most important thing, but I do think it is important because it signals fit as well. Research kind of what the company is, and if is it more of a smart casual atmosphere, is it more professional, do you need to wear a suit and tie, whatever it is, make sure that you are dressing the part too. I also think this can help with your confidence as well, because I know when I put together an outfit and feel good in it, I show up better. So that's another side tip.